said that Judas was made to look like Jesus.
Yeah, who said that? I said, where does the Quran say? And you said they said. Where does the Quran even mention the names of Jesus' disciples?
I'm pulling it up right now just to give you the exact.
It's not in the Quran. That's what I'm trying to get at. Nowhere does the Quran mention the names of Jesus' disciples. So when I keep saying to you, where does the Quran say that? You're going to bring it to me. You can't. It's not in the Quran.
Okay, well, if it's not in the Quran, it must be in Hadith.
No, there is no Hadith authentically narrated by your prophet where he explains the ayah. In fact, the oldest interpretation you have is not that it was Judas. It's attributed to Ibn Abbas. And there it says that it was one of Jesus's followers who volunteered to look like Jesus when Jesus says, who will look like me and die in my place? I will guarantee him Jannah. And the youngest one said, I will. This is in Ibn Kathir. And Jesus repeated it 2 more times, and the youngest one kept saying, I will. So Allah made Jesus's disciple, the youngest one, look like Jesus as Jesus went to Jannah through a hole in the roof with Gabriel, right? And the young disciple looked like Jesus, he was killed. So this view of Judas is not the oldest one. The oldest one is found in Ibn Kathir, attributed to Ibn Abbas, is that it was a follower of Jesus who volunteered to look like Jesus. But either position, you got problems. So Allah will allow a disciple of Jesus to look like Jesus and kill him. So why not just have Jesus die? Why have someone look like him to die? What sense does it make?
Yeah, no, if that's the case, that wouldn't make sense. But I believe that it was Judas. Judas was the one who Judas is the one who backstabbed him. So he's the one.
How do you know he backstabbed him? Where did you get that from?
This is what I learned from the past. I learned that Judas.
What sources?
I can't tell you exactly where, but from my knowledge,
there is no evidence.
I learned that Judas was the one who told the Romans where Jesus was.
Yeah, and the same sources that told you that say that it wasn't Judas, because then the Romans took Jesus and they beat him, flogged him, and nailed him, and Judas hung himself. So you can't choose certain sources to show that Judas betrayed him, but ignore those same sources that say Judas then hung himself out of guilt and Jesus was killed. That doesn't make sense.
So basically that comes from the Christian scripts.
Where and what scripts do you have older than the Christian scripts? The only sources you have about what happened to Christ in the first century are these Christian scripts that you call them, the Gospels and the letters of the New Testament. Everything else will be 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, and even those sources don't say Judas. So you have no evidence. You're going to traditions that come later, even after the time of your prophet. But the earlier evidence that's even before the Quran does not support that. So you want to ignore all of history, and you want to go with the view that Allah made Judas look like Jesus, and then convince people Jesus died, and yet Jesus's followers are the ones who preach that Jesus died and was raised. Where did they get that from?
You said Jesus's followers.
They went around preaching that Jesus was killed and was raised from the dead and appeared to them before he went to heaven. So where did they get that from?
No idea. Isn't that from the Bible?
That's from the earliest records we have. The Gospels, the letters, even if you don't accept them as inspired scriptures, you don't need to. You don't have to believe they're wahi. When an historian wants to examine the life of Jesus, he has to go to the earliest sources. This is what historians do. I'm not making it up. You can go to YouTube, the earliest sources on the life of Jesus, and they're going to tell you it's the Gospels and the letters of Paul. And when they examine them, they apply what's called the historical method, principles to determine whether this happened or not. And on those historical grounds, even an atheist scholar like Bart Ehrman will tell you that we know for a fact Christ was killed. We know for a fact that his followers believed they saw him alive physically and was taken to heaven physically, and they preached that. Now, he doesn't believe Jesus was raised because he's an atheist. But he goes, but we know for a fact he was killed and that his followers were convinced they saw him alive physically and he went to heaven. So where are you getting Judas? I don't know. When even historical scholars who are skeptics, atheists, will say, it is a fact he was killed by crucifixion. That's one fact we know for certain. And his followers were convinced they saw him alive physically after he was killed, which led them to preach that God raised him from the dead and he will return from heaven at the end of time. So where's your evidence that's earlier and more reliable? You have none.
That's true. I mean, it is based off of faith at that point.
Well, I mean, you can't just have faith that's blind. You have to have faith in facts that will lead you to take a step of faith. Well, I have enough facts that I can then believe this. But you don't have facts to support your faith. You have the statement of one person that you trust was a messenger, but even that statement in the Quran says they neither killed him nor crucified him, but it appeared unto them, which led to the Muslim scholars debating on what it exactly means. They couldn't even tell you the exact meaning. That's why I said, if you go to Ibn Kathir, so I said, don't take my word for it. Go to the commentators, Qurtubi, Tabari, Raz, whoever you want. They'll tell you that some said Jesus died for 3 hours, 7 hours, and was raised. Some said that it was Judas the betrayer, but others say it was one of his own disciples. So you see, so even the Muslim scholars, they're not agreed who was made to look like him. Some say Tatawis, the general, some say Judas, some say no, one of the disciples, and the older views was one of the disciples. So they can't even agree. So how clear can the Quran be when you can't even agree on what happens? Then you have people like Shibr Ali who says, no, the Quran's saying he wasn't killed by crucifixion, but he was crucified, but he survived because he swooned and was resuscitated. No, so which view is the right one? Which view is the right one?
I'm going with the ayah from the Quran that obviously states that it was.
What does it mean?
It was made to appear that he was crucified and killed.
So what does that mean? Because they're all going by that ayah and explaining it differently. So what does that mean?
Simply what it is. It was made
it's not
to.
Simple. Shabir says what it means is he was crucified, but he didn't die by crucifixion. It appeared to the Jews that he did die by crucifixion. No, he passed out and was revived later on. So what do you mean simple? I just gave you Muslims who don't see it as simple because they're all over the map. They can't agree. They're following nothing but conjecture, just like the Quran says. So which is it?
I believe what the Quran says.
Okay, well, it says that they neither killed nor crucified him. Okay, the Romans did. That's it, end of story. The Jews didn't, the Romans did. Okay, simple, you see?
What do you mean?
It's talking about the Jews boasting they killed Jesus. It says they didn't kill him, they didn't crucify him. Exactly, the Romans did. So we agree. You didn't do it, Jews, the Romans did. See, simple. So you keep thinking.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, the Jews had a fact in the matter that they could have stopped it or did something about it, but they ordained it themselves.
No, but see, simply, if I go by its simple text, it simply means you didn't do it, the Romans did. See, simple. Refute it. See, when you keep saying it's simple and I keep telling you, no, it's not simple, the Muslims themselves are confused what it means. You keep saying it's simple. Yeah, to the Ismailis, it's simple. It means that they killed his body, not his spirit. So they thought that by killing his body, he died, but no, his spirit lives on. That's Ismailis. They're Muslims. Simple. See, you keep saying it's simple. And I'm telling you, the Muslims who are reading the same verse, it's not so simple. They're disagreed.
Right. I understand that.
So which position as a Christian, when I have 27 books from the 1st century, none of them contradict. They all agree he was killed, but he was raised physically, went to heaven physically, returned physically. So I have unanimous testimony from the 1st century. You want me to now take a statement over 600 years later, words that even Muslims can't agree on, and reject this unanimous testimony? That's not being intelligent or following the facts. That's blind faith. So you need to examine the historical evidence. It's overwhelming.
Yeah, so Jesus was confirmed by eyewitnesses that he was dead. And
so you admit eyewitnesses say he died?
There was eyewitnesses that seen a man that resembled Jesus. And
that's not what the eyewitnesses said. His eyewitnesses were his followers. Peter, Mary Magdalene. Right. These were his followers that said he died and we saw him alive. But these are the followers that Allah said were believers and were empowered to be victorious. So he deceived them.
He made it so where people thought that he was killed.
Yeah, but it's not people. It's Jesus's followers, the Hawariyun, that the Quran says.
Yeah, but he made everybody.
Well, he deceived them?
He made everybody think that he was dead, because if he gave just his group the truth, they would have got killed too.
Okay, so you're admitting that Allah deceived the disciples into believing Jesus was killed and then was raised from the dead, and they went and preached that.
I don't want to call it deceived, but
what do you call it if he didn't die, but he convinced them he did die and was raised from the dead, and they went and preached it? And then they ended up going to prison and being killed for that anyway. I mean, what? I mean, you don't have a problem with that? Why would God deceive me if I'm a faithful follower into believing something didn't happen, and then I go around preaching it and I get imprisoned and eventually killed for it? Because many of them got killed for preaching Christ was killed, but he's been raised and he's alive. How did that save them? That didn't save them. That got them in worse problems. This is a problem, man.
Because they're preaching that he was still alive?
They preached that he was killed and God raised him, and now he's alive in heaven and will return physically. And that got them in trouble and thrown in prison, and some got killed for that. Yeah, this is a fact of history. Even Tabari, your historian, quoting Christian sources, obviously, because he's getting it from Christians, said that Jesus' followers were sent throughout the whole world. He's quoting Ibn Ishaq. Two of them were Peter and Paul, and he admits that Peter and Paul were martyred, became shaheed, were killed for their preaching. It's in Tabari. So why did Allah convince them Jesus was killed, but he's been raised physically, and Jesus appears to them physically, tells them, yeah, I was killed, but I'm alive. And then he goes to heaven physically. They go preaching, they get persecuted, in prison, and some get killed for it. Why would you do that?
I mean, that if I want to look at it from a Christian point of view, that sounds like the Father wanted to kill them.
No, it's because the Son said, I came and volunteered to die. No one can take my life from me. John 10:17-18. John 10:17-18, Jesus says, the reason my Father loves me is because I lay my life down of my own accord. No one takes it away from me. I have command to lay it down, and I have command to authority to lay it down, authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. So I chose and volunteered to die, and I will allow myself to die and then raise myself back, because no one can take it away from me if I don't want to die. That's John 10:17-18. So that's not the Father murdering the Son or killing the Son. That's the Son allowing himself to be killed by the hands of sinners, to die for us in our place, to show his love for us, and then rising from the dead to give us hope that death is not the end of us, because he conquered death. There's resurrection and life everlasting. That's love.
So now, as a Muslim, we believe that our souls do not die after flesh.
Yeah, I know that you believe you live, you're in the grave, barzakh. But how do you know that? Because you believe it, right? But if I really were to press you, you can't prove it. But that's why Jesus died and rose again and left the tomb empty, to give you proof by his physical resurrection, leaving his grave empty. Because I am alive, I destroyed death, and I rose physically. Now you have proof there is life beyond death. You don't have that proof. All you have is some man telling you, yeah, you die, you continue to exist, and then at the end of the age, Yom al-Qiyamah, your bodies will be raised. But he didn't give you any proof. You just take him at his word. Whereas Jesus gave us proof. Look, I'm going to die. On the third day, I'm going to raise my body physically. I'm going to remain in that body physically and make it immortal. Giving you now proof, physical proof, there is life beyond death. We have proof that, hey, I'm going to die, but I'm going to live, because Jesus is alive. He said, because I live, you live. You have a man telling you, but he didn't give you any proof, because he died and was buried. So what proof did he give you? None.